Good day, everyone. Thank you for coming to today's FOLIO Forum, which is sponsored by the Open Library Environment, EBSCO, and Index Data. My name is Eric Hartnett. I'm the Director of Electronic Resources at Texas A&M University and the host for today's event. Today, we will be getting a roadmap update, as well as a look at FOLIO's ERM apps. Today's session, like all FOLIO forums, is being recorded and will be posted to the Open Library Foundation's YouTube channel and to the resources section of folio.org. As an open forum, participants can see participants' names and all questions submitted, and we have muted everyone except the speakers to ensure good sound quality. We value your participation and encourage you to engage in the topic. Please use the Q&A box within Zoom to enter questions and comments as they come to you. If you like to tweet, please use the Twitter hashtag FolioForum. We also encourage you to continue the conversation on this topic on the FOLIO discussion website, discuss.folio.org. Our speakers today are Harry Kaplanian, Senior Director of Product Management and Software Services at EBSCO, and Owen Stephens, Product Owner for the ERM apps. And with that, I will turn things over to Harry.
Hello, everyone. This is Harry. Just real quick, my role in FOLIO really serves as the lead for product management. I'm essentially the facilitator for helping the community get their thoughts, get their ideas together collected, and pulling that all together and building out a backlog, a set of milestones, and a roadmap for the project. It's important to note that this is something that the community works on actively to pull these ideas together to figure out direction as to where this project needs to go. And part of this presentation is obviously going to cover that. But anyway, let's get started. So for some of you that have seen these in the past, these next 3 slides are going to be a bit of a review, but it's important to note some of the important differences of FOLIO compared to other existing systems in the market. And one of them is this idea of open innovation. FOLIO is open source under Apache v2, and the code is available to everyone and anyone that wants to look at it, use it, make copies of it to modify it, whatever the case may be, it's there for everyone. Everything we create is submitted to the open source repository. FOLIO is also based on this idea of a microservices architecture. The old systems or the existing systems that exist today in the library marketplace, especially the academic library marketplace, are really based on traditional monolithic code bases. All these organizations, vendors started with the best intentions to try and create the best possible software to run your libraries. However, over time, as features get added, the code gets complicated, it gets harder and harder to maintain, and over time it becomes really problematic, which explains why many of you have these long list of features that you've wanted to see in your library management systems for many years, and many of the vendors have a really hard time getting to these because it just takes so long, it's so expensive to make these changes, and in many cases, making some of these changes breaks other parts of the system. So with FOLIO, we decided to start with a whole new clean sheet of paper here as far as the design is concerned. It's based on a modern microservice architecture. It's based on replaceable parts and pieces. The idea here is if needed, the system can be extended, it can be added to. There can be multiple applications, oftentimes providing the same functionality, so libraries get the choice, their choice to choose what works best for them. For example, in FOLIO, there are already 2 knowledge bases that are supported. There are 2 different applications that support the management of EHoldings within the library as well, and we expect to see this trend go further in the future. We also expect FOLIO, again, because it is a platform, and although right now we're focused on building the applications that really run the library, where we see FOLIO going as a platform is as libraries start to think about where they need to be 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, or 10 years from now, and the services that they need to provide to their users, FOLIO is the platform that can adopt. Applications can be created to support those future needs, and they can simply be part of FOLIO plugging into the overall architecture. Because it's open source, because it's microservices, we're aiming for having really what amounts to a vibrant ecosystem of partners to help generate economies of scale, to help get as much in terms of a community contributing to the development of FOLIO as a whole. And so this includes libraries, this includes individuals, this includes companies and corporations as well, as we believe everyone has the ability to contribute. And, in many ways, we see this, an analogy to the smartphone market. Of course, it'll never hit that kind of scale. But for instance, when Apple rolled out their first iPhone, it did come with some basic applications, which I think is very much the stage where FOLIO is today. But over time, this entire community formed, building out features and functionality and really extending that core platform really in as many directions as possible to support the library community in this case. FOLIO also, in addition to a platform being first and foremost as far as what FOLIO is, FOLIO itself also provides some feature advantages that don't really exist in the market today as well. So one of those being metadata formats. It's been designed from the start to support multiple additional metadata formats. Although right now FOLIO supports its own internal format as well as MARC. Fairly soon, most likely starting next year, we expect to see other metadata formats added to FOLIO as well. It's easy to imagine Dublin Core or others and just really moving on from there, especially anything that might be related to linked data or what have you. Because FOLIO is an open source platform, it really enables itself to be a place to really where these different formats can be built, experimented with, and worked with, really, again, looking for the future of where libraries want to go. I mentioned this earlier, multiple knowledge bases. While there are systems built around a single knowledge base today, FOLIO believes that one library should have a choice of the knowledge base that they choose to use, and actually take it a little bit further and start to think about, what about multiple knowledge bases simultaneously? So maybe you can use a traditional knowledge base for your e-resources, maybe another one for print, and possibly take it further. And maybe there's additional knowledge bases that could be super useful in terms of dealing with the library's music collection. We'd like to see all of those be pulled in. And that's definitely a direction FOLIO is heading. In addition, FOLIO supports the idea of a full collection view. Within a single system, you should be able to manage all the content that your library makes available to your users, whether it's electronic, whether it's print, whether it's institutional repositories, whatever the case may be. All of it should be able to be pulled in and managed in one place, because ultimately this all really represents the inventory, or at least your collection of what you make available to your users. So again, I mentioned FOLIO is a platform, and just sort of the basics about how this works. When we started FOLIO, again, the idea was we want a community to form around FOLIO. We want a community to be able to build for FOLIO. And so we imagined from the start that FOLIO would be built by many, in often cases, independent teams that are building out functionality. And historically, if you have something like that, you get really sort of a really disjointed look and feel. And what we really wanted was this idea of, let's have the community build this, but at the same time, what can we put in place so it looks like it was created by a single organization? And so to that end, we have a UI toolkit that's built on React Redux. It provides localization and accessibility to FOLIO as well. And as long as an organization builds using this user interface toolkit, which is called Stripes, you should have that consistent look and feel across all the apps. And you'll see a little bit later in the demonstration that Owen is going to give, where he'll be navigating across multiple apps, and they definitely have a consistent look and feel. At the same time, again, Folio is based on this idea of a microservice architecture, which is called Okapi. And this really amounts to the core APIs, the switchboard. It's where tenants are managed, because Folio has been designed to be multi-tenant from the start. And really, again, Okapi represents the switchboard. And so the different applications can plug in. They have a consistent way of doing this, and they're able to communicate essentially with each other, able to broadcast messages, what have you, and different apps can respond to that. In addition, there's a series of, I guess, what we're calling core Folio applications, which are really the basics of what's needed to run a library. So for instance, circulation, acquisitions, resource management, which really represents e-resources or ERM functionality, as well as your physical resources within the library, cataloging as well for metadata management. And again, as you look in Folio, these really kind of break down into a series of almost sub-applications. And there are already applications being built that really expand the scope of what is core. Some of them exist within Folio as projects. Some of them actually exist outside of Folio because they're taking advantage of the Folio platform. In addition, we have what we're calling non-core apps. These are really still needed by libraries everywhere to operate their libraries. But for instance, there was a conscious decision made early on in the Folio project. We're not really going to build an OPAC, or at least not initially. If someone or an interested organization party wants to, of course, they're free to do so. There's nothing stopping them. But with ViewFind, Blacklight, and then commercial discovery services like EDS and others available, it'd be kind of nice if we can provide a platform where libraries get to choose the end user interface that best suits their needs and their patrons' needs. And so far, that's how we've gone forward in terms of Folio, and libraries get their choice. Union catalogs, there's many different options out there. Is all we know, it really at this point is Folio needs to be able to integrate with existing union catalogs, while at the same time, some of the inventory functionality that exists and some of the future development that's going on for some library organizations, they may actually choose to use Folio as the union catalog. We expect, future expansion into digital repositories. Also, there's all sorts of additional third-party integrations, whether it be ILL systems, whether it be self-check equipment, whether it be protocols like Z3950, OAI harvesting, whatever the case may be. There's actually a toolkit that's part of Folio that provides a consistent way to integrate with all these external services as well. And all of these really sort of representing that ecosystem of what is this Folio framework, this Folio platform, and what it provides in terms of functionality and integration to the greater market. So this is what amounts to our milestones, or some, would argue this is a roadmap. Here we try to break it out on a quarterly basis. Our planning in Folio really revolves around a quarter. Within a quarter, Folio develops code on really, again, a modern agile concept, or at least as best we can when you're dealing with many independent organizations that are writing code. But it's very close to what I would say agile Scrum. They're 2-week sprints. Every 2 sprints, or roughly every 4 weeks, we do a sprint demo. Those are all recorded and made available to the public. Anyone can access those, I believe, on YouTube and other places as well. I also believe there are links to these on many of the Folio documentation that exists out there, such as the wiki and the website. Q3, we just finished rolling out, and this is really our early adopter release, which is called Daisy. And really with Daisy, we're in a very special place because we've actually we actually have our very first library running on FOLIO. And I'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. But some of the basic things we've been focusing, patron notices, invoicing, refining ERM functionality, which Owen will show you in a little while, external integrations, especially those integrations that are needed to get some of the first libraries up and running, import functionality, counter 5 reporting, in-app reports in general, which really means there are reports that need to be run every day or sometimes multiple times a day. It doesn't necessarily make sense to force someone to go to a reporting tool or a report generator. So what are those special reports that we can identify and build in as part of the different applications of FOLIO to make these, as quickly and as easily available to run as often as possible? With this first library and the first libraries that are in the process of adopting FOLIO, there's also anonymization, which has been critical to provide the privacy that's required for libraries. Some of the migration tools, or at least the early migration tools. And prior to this, there's been an enormous amount of testing that has gone on in FOLIO. But there's testing in a test environment, and then there's what happens when you roll out the software live in a real environment and actually try to use it day to day. And so with this first library implementation, we've learned a lot. And so we've been working on improving performance issues that we found, defects and stability issues that we found as well. Q3 as well as Q4 are also important because they represent a bit of a pivot in the project, where everything prior to Q3 was really trying to get this initial library up and running because it's critical in terms of learning. But now we're pivoting more to, all right, what are the things we need to do to get the next round of early adopters to be able to really implement FOLIO, to use it day to day within their libraries as well. And so we're in a great situation now where libraries are actually starting to test FOLIO with their data. In addition, there's continued stability enhancements, performance, defects enhancements based on what we're learning, not just from the first adopter, but also the next round of early adopters that are doing testing on their own with their own data. There's work now ongoing with a greater set of integrations because there's, of course, a different set of software tools that exist within the library or other systems that the FOLIO will need to integrate with. There's further development going on with reporting and analytics. There's additional work going on with migration tools, where before, there was a bit of a concern with getting a library migrated from one system. Now we've got a whole series of other systems that we need to get them going with as well. Course reserves work has started. We expect to see that delivered by the end of the quarter. There's a lot of work going on improving fund management as part of acquisitions within FOLIO. We're aiming to get MARC cataloging completed by the end of the quarter. And then another critical piece, up through and including Q3, if you installed FOLIO and loaded data into it, there was no real easy way to do an upgrade to the next version. So one of the things we're focusing on in Q4 is to give these next versions of FOLIO, which will be Edelweiss, the ability to, when you install, to make it a whole lot easier. So if there's database schema changes or anything else that needs to happen, a lot of that can start to happen automatically, where today it's actually a manual process. But these improvements are on the way. There's also a bit of spillover, maybe some things we wanted to get done in Q3 that are happening in Q4. And to be truthful, the same can be said in almost every quarter. We do our best to estimate how much work and how much time will be required to build out features and functionality, but there are always surprises, and you never really fully understand the problem until you deep dive into it and actually try to build it. So starting in Q1 of next year is really when the second round of early adopters really start preparing for implementation. And so a lot of the development looks, frankly, more like some of what we've seen. Again, stability, performance, and defects. But this project has been in development for several years now, and over time, any software project builds up a certain amount of technical debt. We'll be addressing some of these things because some of them just frankly have come due, and the payment has to be made. Again, more integration, migration, but we're also expect to actively start development of the export tools in FOLIO, because up until this point in time, there's been a focus on import, and we know, of course, getting data into FOLIO is absolutely critical, but getting it out of FOLIO is just as critical. And we can't just assume that every system out there will be able to work via an API. So we do need other tools, and those are being worked on. Some of the feedback we're getting from all of the early testing by the early adopters is searching needs to be improved. So there's work that's going to be ongoing to improve searching, to provide better search capabilities within FOLIO. And again, the spillover, as I mentioned earlier. Goldenrod, which is Q2, what we expect by the middle to the end of Q2 is really some of these early adopters, this round 2 of adopters, actually start to implement. And so we're not really listing an enormous amount of features here because, again, our focus is going to be really resolving all the issues that these early adopters find. And some of these are really just using features, frankly, for the first time that not everyone was able to test previously. And then as we look into Q3 and Q4, again, these are really kind of general, don't cover a lot of details, but a lot of this is because once these libraries get their systems up and running, we're going to be meeting together back again and really starting to go back our backlogs in terms of features that we all felt were important, that the community thought was important, and really start to review these and start to think about, all right, based on what we know today, based on actual use, let's go back and take a look. Do our priorities still apply? Do they still make sense? We expect to see some adjustments here. On top of it, FOLIO is an open source project. And what we're starting to see is as the community forms and expands around FOLIO, we're starting to see almost like groupings of libraries start to form where they're getting together and starting to align based on like needs and starting to build out some of the functionalities that they need as well. So in many ways, we see groupings of libraries really starting to take control of their destiny, which is fantastic, which is really what we want and need to see in an open source project. But again, when we look at Q3 and Q4, really we're talking about advanced feature sets across all areas. Starting to focus more on multi-tenant and consortia features which are needed, ILL requirements which are still in the process of being detailed and hammered out, although some of this will be handled with integrations with external systems. And then again, as we look into Q4, in many ways, very much the same thing. Just real quick, there's this sort of blue triangle on the background, which I probably should have mentioned earlier, which goes from blue to a much lighter shade of blue or almost white. And again, that always sort of represents our cone of uncertainty. And so we know the most about what we're actively working on, and the further we look out into the future, the harder it becomes to predict. And so of course, as you move from left to right in this chart, it does become harder and harder to predict. But we do expect change. Change is healthy, and it's a good thing, especially in a project in the stage where it's at today, where we're really rapidly trying to get as many libraries as possible to use the system. So our first library is live. I mentioned this, and this is a huge milestone for the project. Chalmers University of Sweden, they're running FOLIO. The library is in actual operation as of September 30th. They actually started with the ERM features, which represent the EHoldings, licenses, and agreements applications in FOLIO roughly about a month prior. And then once that was up and running, the circulation apps such as check-in, check-out, and requests, inventory and receiving, patron management, and within acquisitions, they're making use of orders and organizations as well. Work went on to integrate the Swedish National Union Catalog, where most of their cataloging actually occurs, And once those records are created, they're moved into FOLIO via what amounts to a process via an API, an automatic process. Their self-check equipment, which represents 2 different types, have been integrated via SIP2, scanners, integration with their discovery service, which in this case is EDS, and the external knowledge base in this case, which again is EBSCO's as well, is being used. And of course, there's fine-tuning, adjustments, but pretty much most of these licenses, agreements, the circulation functionality, inventory, receiving, patron management, acquisitions, what have you, including self-checkout. These are all tools and features that frankly are getting better because we have someone using it. And pretty much every single thing that has been identified really are things that have to be improved or modified for really the greater overall FOLIO community. So this is a huge milestone, and it's a great place to be for a project. So our round 2 early adopters, roughly speaking, is mid-2020. Again, most of these libraries are actually already testing FOLIO with their library's data. Many of these libraries are now focused on really building out implementation plans, either with a vendor or for libraries that are choosing to do this themselves, amongst themselves. And what's important here is because they're using the software and using it with their data, they're really getting a much better understanding of how FOLIO operates, what's there, what isn't, how their workflows might have to adjust or change, might there just be workarounds or different ways of doing things? And so they're starting to plan for all of this. But also because FOLIO is so modular in nature, it also gives the library a lot of choices because migration in FOLIO doesn't have to be an all or nothing thing. It could be handled in parts and pieces. And so this is what libraries are planning right now. And so although the slide here says mid-2020, the GBV plans to adopt everything initially but circulation, and that should happen early 2020, roughly speaking, about the February timeframe of next year. University of Leipzig is actually targeting the same date, mostly focused on ERM and acquisitions. We have Wentworth and Simmons, which are part of FLOW. They're aiming much closer to the middle of the year and for a full system, as is University of Chicago. And Duke is aiming for middle of the year for ERM functionality. Lehigh full, the 5 colleges, ERM and acquisitions, and University of Alabama is targeting a full implementation as well, although that's most likely going to be a little bit past the middle of next year, probably closer to about October. Some of these libraries, if you take a look, Texas A&M, excuse me, not Texas A&M, Duke and 5 colleges are really spreading this out over a longer time frame. And so we expect to see them fully migrate, not just some of the parts and pieces, by the middle of 2021. And Texas A&M expects to fully adopt FOLIO by then as well. These are not the only libraries. We know there are other libraries that are working on their initial planning and working on timeframes and milestones that work for them. And so over the coming months, you're going to start to see more announcements of other libraries that will be adopting FOLIO as well. And anyway, that's it, at least from my part of this presentation. If any of you have any questions, I think we have a couple of minutes. I'm happy to answer them if they exist. And
okay, somebody asked what tech debt is.
So when you're building software, oftentimes you have to make technical decisions, and oftentimes to move a project forward, especially when you're diving into areas you may not necessarily have a full understanding of the problem yet, or oftentimes you think you've solved the problem in the best and most correct way. And while hindsight is everything, sometimes you realize after the fact that, you know what, there's some things we probably should have done a little differently. And that could be anything from architecture to the user interface, whatever the case may be. It's just a common thing in software development. And so again, this project has been under development for, actually greater than 2 years. And so there's some things that we know now that weren't that crystal clear 2 or 3 years ago. So we're going to go back and do some cleanup work, some refactoring. And again, this happens in every piece of software. It's a part of getting software to mature. And so, it's something we have to spend time on, but frankly, it's also a good thing because it makes the software better for everyone. Are there any others?
It looks like we've got a question about ERM, which we'll be covering in a little while, in just a minute.
Yes, let's save that one.
And then there's a question that I don't quite understand. It says, do you have the full charges for fees loaded, and how that will develop?
I read this as maybe 2 possible questions. One of them may be a migration question. I'm assuming of maybe migrating existing fees into FOLIO, which will be a factor of the migration tools. And if the library chooses to do this, and when they choose to do the actual migration. That said, FOLIO internally, once it's up and running, certainly keeps track of any fines and fees, forgiveness, or whatever else is needed to manage that. And hopefully that answers the question.
And then another question is, where is FOLIO now with counter 5 stats harvests? This may be an Owen question also.
Actually, they'll probably, University of Leipzig would probably be the best because they're the ones that have actually been focused on building that functionality, the harvester. But they've actually built, frankly, a really nice harvester for FOLIO that can harvest these type of statistics from different organizations and different vendors. And I have to be honest, I haven't really dove into the counter 5 part, but I believe it's already in testing. And I believe if you go into one of the demo sites, you can actually take a look at it. I'll leave it at that.
And then somebody asked, what does multi-tenant mean?
So multi-tenant in many ways refers to being able to manage multiple organizations within a piece of software in an independent way. Tenancy in many ways is a lot like, real estate in terms of an apartment building. You've got a single building, but with multiple tenants making use of that space, where each tenant actually represents a private location within the greater building where they can manage their lives. So in FOLIO supports the ability to create multiple tenants. Each library can be represented by a tenant and can fully run and operate independently. Part of the consortia functionality that we'll be rolling out with FOLIO actually are the tools that allow the communication across these different libraries or different tenants. It can be used at a single, for example, university that might have multiple libraries, multiple campuses. It's very useful in consortia type situations and frankly, vendor situations as well.
I think we're all caught up.
All right. In that case, I'll leave it to Owen. Thank you, everyone.
Right, hi everybody. Hopefully you can hear me, and I can share my screen. So I'm here in Germany with colleagues from the GBV Library Network in Göttingen, and we've been hopefully you can see my slide deck now. We've been discussing aspects of electronic resource management, or ERM, and looking at some scenarios with colleagues from libraries in Germany, which are in the next round of early adopters. That means that I'm working on a computer that has a German language interface and a keyboard that has a German language layout. So apologies if I mistype or seem not in control at any point. I can ask a colleague to translate any error messages I see. And I should say that I'm here representing as the product owner, so kind of for some of the electronic resource management apps, specifically agreements and licenses. And we're going to see a group of the functionality that these give in terms of electronic resource management today. But I'm just here as part of a much larger team. You can see some of the other people in the room who've contributed to understanding the requirements and helping develop. And there are lots of people outside this room who contribute on a weekly basis to discussions, and the developers who do the work of turning those requirements into working applications, who are not seen here, but are obviously a key part of delivering the application. So I've just got a few slides to start with, and then we'll see a demonstration of the functionality. So the areas of FOLIO I'm going to be looking at today are what I've described as the working parts of ERM. And I just wanted to talk about the terms here, which I might use as I go through the presentation. So there are kind of three main areas that we're going to see today. And the first one is what we call agreements. And these are the heart of electronic resource management in FOLIO, because they're a way of bringing together sets of resources, so lists of titles or electronic resources, packages, sets of license terms, and other information which we'll see as we look at the system. And they kind of bring that all together, so they act as a way of representing a set of information that's coming from several different places. On the other side of the screen, we have licenses, and these are allowing us to record terms of use and record documentation. And one of the, sometimes in terminology, we might say what one person calls a license, maybe FOLIO might call an agreement. But the important thing for us is that those licenses can apply to multiple agreements. So if you have one license, but it's controlling several sets of, or it's relevant to several different sets of resources or different resources over time, then the license, separating those out, allows us to have the same license applied to multiple sets of resources. And I'll show you how that works when we get into the demonstration. And then in the center of this, we have the kind of, what I've said here is the knowledge base, and there are two icons here because actually, as Harry mentioned earlier, we support multiple knowledge bases, and there are two at the moment, which I'll talk about in a moment. But these are ways of knowing what the resources are. So rather than having to have a new place to record the same information, what we wanted to do was to take existing places where there were high quality lists of what electronic resources there were to purchase, where they were hosted, how they were sold as packages or as individual titles, and make that accessible within FOLIO. So I'll be showing you some examples of that and how we work with different knowledge bases during the demonstration. But that's the list of resources that we can license and purchase within FOLIO. Alongside those kind of key applications, we integrate with a lot of other applications, and we could see this as part of the broader, when we talk about electronic resource management, I'm responsible, so as a product owner, what that means is that I'm kind of responsible for steering the development of the product, understanding from users and librarians what they need the functionality to do, how they need the applications to behave and what data needs recording, and I hopefully turn that into requirements which we hand to the development team to develop the software. So I try and gather together lots of different information from lots of different viewpoints and bring that together into a cohesive way of meeting all those needs. But my role is really focused on agreements and licenses, and we have all these other applications that Harry mentioned earlier, that FOLIO is made up of all these different applications, and clearly we need to integrate between these different applications and make them all work together. And I think the eResources applications are a really great example of how, by bringing all these different things together, you get a system where you have these kind of independent development and independent applications, but you deliver a single set of functionality for the library. I've listed e-usage here, and there was a question about counter statistics earlier, and that's part of the e-usage app, which is integrated, and I'll show you some level of that integration today, but I'm not going to talk about e-usage in detail today. There was an e-usage FOLIO forum, I think back in March, which it gives the overview of that application, and the product owner for that, Annika at the University of Leipzig, talks about their development so far and their plans, including the harvesting of counter compliance statistics using Sushi, which, as Harry says, has been part of the development in e-usage. But we also integrate with lots of other parts of the system, some of which may be very obvious, so orders, so you can order resources and users, but also with some applications that maybe do smaller things like notes and tags, which kind of enhance the functionality of what we do here. And as we look at the demonstration, I'll point out those integrations and say where we're working with other applications, and you'll be able to see that quite clearly, I hope. One of the applications that we work with is called EHoldings, and Harry mentioned earlier the working with different knowledge bases, and EHoldings is an application in FOLIO that allows you to manage resources in a remote knowledge base, and currently that's in the EBSCO knowledge base. So that has been developed and is in use to allow the management of that knowledge base from FOLIO. And so when we looked at the development of how agreements work, and the agreements collect together lists of resources in what we call agreement lines, a resource within an agreement. And if you were using EHoldings to manage your e-resources in a knowledge base, then we didn't want to have you replicate or duplicate any functionality there or work there. So you're able to add those directly into an agreement and say, we're managing this resource in this way. And we'll see, I'll show you how that works briefly in the demonstration. Again, EHoldings is one of the products that I'm not responsible for. I'm responsible for making sure it integrates with the agreements application, the licenses application. But Khalila Gambrel is the product owner for that, and so is the person who would have the expertise to give you a full demonstration of the EHoldings application. So I'm going to focus more on how that integrates with agreements and the functionality that then agreements brings to the picture and licenses bring to the picture. Typically, where we would suggest this kind of pattern of using EHoldings for managing your knowledge base is where you have a compatible an API to a knowledge base that you're already using for your e-resources, and you can manage all the resources from Folio in that, and then add them into agreements using the integration we've already done. For those of you who don't have an existing knowledge base that can work in that way, or want to take a different approach, we also have an internal knowledge base in Folio, and we can populate that from different sources. And at the moment, we populate from the global open knowledge base, or GoKB, and also by allowing you to import files directly. So if you have a file of electronic resources you want to manage in Folio, you can do an import of that file and add the resources directly. This kind of situation you might use where you don't have an API to your knowledge base which is compatible with EHoldings, but you are able to export the data from your knowledge base, or you want to use an open knowledge base like the GoKB Global Open Knowledge Base to manage some of that data. And the integration with the Global Open Knowledge Base is what we call a harvesting arrangement. That is, the system automatically goes out and asks for the latest information and updates it without you having to do any daily tasks or anything. That happens automatically. As there are updates in the remote knowledge base, they're brought in to Folio without any more effort on your part. In general, we might expect you to use either EHoldings as your knowledge base or as your knowledge base management tool, or to use the internal one, but not both at the same time. But it is possible to use both, as Harry was mentioning, that we have designed this to expect there might be multiple sources for information that you want to manage. And if that's the case, there's no problem with using the two approaches that we have at the moment, both at the same time. But it's not something we've really explored in any depth with any adopters yet, although we have had some conversations about scenarios where that might be desirable. So I'm going to move to the demonstration part now, but I'll just pause just in case any questions have come into Eric in the meantime that I can answer.
We don't have anything so far that needs to be covered. I think you might cover the one question we have during your demonstration.
Okay, yeah, great. Okay, so the way I've set up this demonstration is to try and take a reasonably realistic example. I don't do electronic resource management as a daily part of my job. I used to, but I don't. That was quite a long time ago. So if I've misapprehended some of the ways that this particular agreement or subscription or license might work, that's entirely down to me. But it is based on a real scenario which has been described by people contributing to the ERM development process. So hopefully it's a scenario that you will recognize. So what I'm going to do is hopefully switch to not that one, this one. So hopefully that you are able to see on my screen the FOLIO application.
We can.
And I'm in the agreements application here, and I've set up already a subscription to the American Medical Society journals. Actually, I should just go back to the previous slide to talk through this example very briefly. So this is an agreement or license that runs from January 2018 to December 2023. There's an annual payment, but there's an option to cancel up to 30 days before the end of the current year. So it's kind of on a renewal basis, although the license is signed for that 5-year period, or 6-year period, the payment is annual and there's an option to cancel annually. We get access to a set of the JAMA journals and other journals as part of that package, and we get some post-cancellation access if we do decide to cancel the agreement. So I'm hoping to walk you through how that's managed. All those bits of the process are managed in FOLIO, so it's kind of compressed timescale of a whole cycle of electronic resource management, hopefully in about 20 minutes. So this is the basic landing screen for agreements. We have searching down the side here for searching for agreements by name and status and these different kind of filters down the side. We only have one agreement in this demo system, so I'm not going to show you search because there's not much point, but those all work as you might expect them to work. And if you type in terms here, you'll find the agreements, or you can filter by the list of agreements based on the criteria you want. So if I have a look at this actual agreement here and what it means. This is my agreement for the American Medical Society, or it should be Association Journals, actually. I should update that. And we have a description of it, not a very useful one in this case, but we can put in some useful information in the description if we want. And we can see here that we're in what I've called a period from the 1st of January 2019 to the 31st of December 2019. And that's if you remember from the setup, although this is running over several years as an overall agreement, I kind of have an annual option to both pay and to cancel. And so here we have the current period that I'm in and my cancellation deadline here. So I can track that I need to give notice 30 days before the end of the current period if I want to cancel. And if I scroll down the agreement, there are lots of sections to an agreement, different parts of it, but one of them is other periods. And if I look there, I can see this is the 2018 period, and that I've put it on note that we renewed at the end of that period. So each period that I have, I can kind of record that period of time and have a cancellation deadline if that applies, and note that I've renewed it, or any other notes that I want in that period note. Going through like some of the other information in the agreement, I'll be trying to cover everything eventually, but I'm just kind of going to look at this agreement as it currently is set up. I haven't fully populated it yet because we're going to use that as part of the demonstration, but I've already added some organizations to this agreement, and these are organizations which were involved somehow with the delivery of this agreement to me. So we have the American Medical Association as the content provider. They have a couple of what are called interfaces. Those are like the place online that you might access it in the end user interface is the online platform where the content lives. And I also have an admin interface, which is where I might get statistics and that kind of thing. that has a username and password associated with it, which is blanked out at the moment. If I have permission to view that, I can click the Show Credentials button to view that. And here I see the username and password, and I only see that if I have permission. So if I was a user without permission to see credentials there, I wouldn't see those. I wouldn't be allowed to see those. I can also see I have another organisation, which is EBSCO, as my subscription agent in this case, and they also have a platform for managing my my subscription. So that's fine as an agreement, and it kind of describes my relationship with some organisations for my set of content. But I haven't actually defined any content in there at the moment. I'm going to first of all show you what this means if I'm using EHoldings, which is a kind of interface to the EBSCO knowledge base. And then I'll show you what it means if you're using the internal knowledge base setup, so we can see both those approaches. If I switch to EHoldings, and let me go. Then I can find, so this is Matt now. I mean, EHoldings, this is starting the, this is integrating with the EBSCO knowledge base. All the information you're seeing here is coming directly from the knowledge base. And as I say, I can't give you a full demonstration of this, but you can activate titles in that knowledge base to show if you want to, and there are many settings that are in the EHoldings. But what I'm interested in here is saying that these 23 titles, for instance, are my package of content that are in my agreement. So you can see they're already selected in the EHoldings. That means they've been activated in the knowledge base, but this is where I would add them into my agreement. So I can add my agreement here, and it gives me a search interface for my agreements. I just have the one, and that's now linked this agreement, this package of content, to my agreement. And if I go back to agreements and have a look at it, I'll see that I now have one agreement line, and this is where we record the resources. And we can see that I have an agreement line for that package with 23 items in, and some other information if I have it. And we'll see us filling in some of that information later. This title here, or this name here for the package, is a link back to that package within EHoldings, where I can see information about all the titles that are in there and do my management of that resource. And that's how I would manage it if I was using the EHoldings as my knowledge base. What I'm going to do now is go into the edit view of this agreement, which we haven't seen yet, both to remove that line, and also we can do some other editing while I'm in there. So if I edit this, this is where obviously I set up this agreement in the first place, and I have the name. So this is where I can, it should be association, not society. So let's correct that. And here you can see these are my agreement periods. Here's the first one with my note, and here's my second one. And I could add a new agreement period. If I was going to take this forward into 2020, I would add that there with a new cancellation deadline as necessary. if I want to link the agreement to a member of staff in my library, I can add contacts into the agreement. So this is about people within your library system, not vendor contacts. So if I were to find a member of staff user, so let's say that Amira Emerson Grant is our, oh no, they're inactive. Let's say Perry Drake Jast is the ERM librarian. We can find them and then say, this is the ERM librarian for this agreement. So in this case, that might mean that it's the person I need to contact if I have questions about the agreement or the license, etc.
Owen?
Yeah.
I have a question. We got a question about
Sure.
Importing the agreement line in. The question is, would the package have to be selected in the EBSCO knowledge base first or before it could be activated from EHoldings?
I don't think that's a restriction we have, no. So you wouldn't have to activate it. You could add it to the agreement first if you wanted to do it in that order.
Thank you.
So here's my agreement line, and this is the agreement line pointing back at that EHoldings. Normally that would be enough and I wouldn't change this now, but because I want to show you the other way of adding an agreement line from the internal knowledge base, I'm going to delete this and switch the system into using the internal knowledge base instead of EHoldings for that content. So I just need to change a setting to do that. And so now I'm back in agreements, but I've got an additional part of the agreements app that wasn't there before, which is the e-resources tab here. And this is my internal knowledge base, where I can find resources that are stored in the internal knowledge base. So I'm going to find a package here. It was the American Medical Association. This is data from GoKB, which is being maintained by some libraries in Germany. This particular package, data has been entered there, and I can click on that and see, in this case, we have this version of the package, and this is essentially the equivalent of what I was previously looking at in EHoldings, but for a library that's not using that application. I'm going to add this package to what's called the basket. In this case, we have a slightly different way of linking between resources and agreements when you're using the internal knowledge base. And as I say, we generally expect people to use either one or the other. But I can now then add that to my agreement. And now this is back in the edit view of the same agreement that I was looking at before, but now instead I have the agreement line, and that's coming from the internal knowledge base in this case. I can, so apart from the fact that it's coming from a different knowledge base, most of the functionality is the same. There are some differences, as you might expect, but depending on which knowledge base you use, and I will highlight some of those. But a lot of the functionality around this is exactly the same. I'm not going to go through every single field here, but one of the important things is being able to link a purchase order to the agreement line, so we can say how we're paying for it or how we've ordered it. And this now is looking at the orders application. So this is not within the e-resources specific, it's just the orders application, which would manage all the orders. I can find my AMA journals order and link that in. And now we can see that this is the package we've got, and here's the purchase order line. And if I save that, then now if I look at my agreement lines in the view, I have my agreement line, which is here, which says that I have the current titles. I can see the purchase order line, and that's a live link to the purchase order line in the orders application. And below that, because I'm using the internal knowledge base and the slightly different functionality, with EHoldings, you would click over to EHoldings to see this information. In the internal knowledge base, you see it just in line in the agreement. This is a list of journals that's part of that package. So we can see immediately from here that this package, which is a single order, has given us access to these 20 or so titles. A couple of final things that I just wanted to point out on the agreement before we look at the license firstly, I mentioned the e-usage. If I have an e-usage data provider for this agreement, I can link that here. So I have set up a harvester for the American Medical Association, and that tells me that this is where I look for my e-usage. At the moment, we haven't gone further than that, so there's at the moment that we're not bringing that usage data into the agreement for display, but being able to do that kind of summarization of usage data against the agreement is obviously something we'd like to move towards, and with the link with finance, purchase order and invoicing. Obviously the ideal is being able to bring all of that information together to give things like cost per use calculations, which we're not quite at yet. And the last thing I wanted to just show, again, I know I mentioned integration with other applications. One of the not so obvious integrations is that we have notes at the bottom here. And this is actually another application in Folio, but it's a very lightweight application that can be used in lots of different places. So I can set up a note, so different types of note, but I've got a price control note here. So I can say no price control on this agreement, and I could put in a longer details if I want, but I can now see that note is appearing on that agreement, and I can add notes as I want, and I can reuse notes across multiple places. So if I set up a standardized note like this one, I could use that in multiple places so that I could then gather together things that had the no price control note or whatever I wanted to do. So that's quite a lightning tour of the agreement. I'm going to come back to the agreement in a minute, but I want to switch over to licensing, because we've kind of used this to say, this is the content we have, these are the organizations, this is who's providing it, but we haven't done anything with the licenses yet. So I'm going to switch over to licenses, and I've set up again in advance a license here. So this is the licensing app. You can see we've got the search down the left-hand side, exactly the same layout, which is common across most of the Folio applications. Is this search and filtering layout and seeing the results. If I look at the license here, this is my license. There are some similarities between licenses and agreements in the way we've structured them. So similarly to agreements, you have internal contacts. So we can see Eileen Brown is the authorized signatory for this license. So we can contact them if we needed to talk to them about it. We can have organizations, and these might have different roles in the context of licenses, like the licensor or the licensee. But there might be some overlap with organization roles in agreements as well, but they can be different. Perhaps the key part of the license is the terms, and I'll show those in just a moment. But just to note that at the top here, if you remember back to when I was describing the scenario, I said that this was a 2018 to 2023 agreement. That's reflected in this license lasting the whole period, while in the agreement we're able to kind of do the year-on-year tracking, and do we cancel or do we content review at the end of each year. Here we can see it's like the whole period, and the license will cover us for that entire time, no matter how many periods in the agreement we record. In the terms, the list of terms that you have on a license is entirely down to you when you implement the system and afterwards, so you can add and amend terms once they've been added, and we can support different types of term. So we've populated this test system with some what seem to be a good set of standard terms that libraries might want to record, but you're not limited to these in any way. You don't have to use the ones we're showing on the screen. It's entirely up to you in the implementation what license terms you would list and how you would record that information. But we have things like the definition of the authorized user, or the number of concurrent users allowed, whether walk-in access is permitted, etc. All the things that you might expect to be able to record. But as I say, it's entirely up to you when you set up your system, or what terms you list there. And if I edit this license, we can see that there's some fields similarly to the agreement fields. We have some kind of summary header information, and then we have things like the organizations, the contacts, and the terms, which we can edit here. So we're seeing a list of terms. The ones we see displayed on the screen are the ones that have been defined as core for the institution. So these will always appear even if you haven't completed the values. So even though this hasn't got a value set, it's still showing, because the institution has said this is something we would typically record, so make sure it displays. You can also have terms that don't fall into that category, and we have these at the bottom. So ones that you might sometimes add, but you don't want to be on the screen all the time. And we can add new terms of different types here that are, again, defined by the organization, the library, but are maybe not the ones that would always display, even if they're not set. And which terms appear by default and which terms are hidden is entirely up to you. You can have no default terms. You can have all of them default terms. It's entirely up to you. The other thing I wanted to show here is that we can add a document to our license, and I can do this in different ways. So this might be my license document for AMA, and I can upload a file here. So I can store a file in the system, or I can record a physical location. So maybe it's in my filing cabinet. And if it was online, I could put a URL in to as well. And I can do one or all of these. So I can have it in print and in a filing cabinet, or online and as well. And this idea of adding a document, which might be made up of a physical document, an online web page or URL, an online document, or a file uploaded, like we use again and again throughout agreements and licenses. So if I go down, you could see I could also add supplementary documents as well, and that works in exactly the same way. So the only difference is that I can categorize my supplementary documents into kind of more granular types. So now I've recorded my license. I want to go back to my agreement, and I'm going to link these together now. So if I edit my agreement, I can say I'm ready to add a license to that agreement. And there it is. So when I add a license to an agreement, I have three options in terms of how it applies. I can say it's the controlling license, and that means it's the one that will apply terms to this agreement right now. And typically that's what I would use. But I can also say this was a historical license. So if I want to record that there used to be a different license on this same resource, I can do that. And I can also say there's one coming down the track. It's going to be next year, we're going to have a different license on this agreement if I need to as well. But I can only have one controlling license at a time. So you can't have multiple licenses controlling the terms on the agreement, but you can have multiple licenses that are either historical or future. Once I link that into the agreement, if I now look at the agreement, I have this section called license and business terms, and those are coming from that linked controlling license. So I can see here, those are the terms that I saw set in the license, and as I update them in the license, that anybody looking at the agreement would see the latest version of that. I can also record license amendments. So in the case of JAMA, they decided in, I think it was, if I can find the details, in February 2019, they issued a statement that said they now permit text and data mining. So we might treat that as just a change to the license, and we could just edit that directly. But I want to use this as an excuse to show you the amendment functionality. So if you have license amendments issued, you can add these into the license. And so this is the TDM amendment. And I can say that started in February. And it's open-ended. And here I can attach documents as well, so I could link to their webpage where this is stated. But I can also set terms in the amendment, and these can either add to the terms from the license or they can override. So I'm going to add this as the text and data mining term and say it's permitted. You can see actually the values here. Again, these are set by the library, but you can have different lists of values for different term types. So we've got kind of a long list of different ways of interpreting permitted or prohibited behavior, but you can have simple yes, no, if you prefer to have that, and you can set up whatever lists you like there. I'm going to save and close that. Now in my agreement, where I've linked this license, as well as the license here, I now have the TDM amendment, and I can say that this is a current amendment for this agreement. And this is important because you can have amendments that don't apply to all of your resources. So you can have amendments that apply only to a specific agreement, or you can have amendments that apply to all your agreements, and you can set that. And again, you can have a do not apply or future and historical. And if I save that now and look at the terms again, I'll now see that that text and data mining term has been added into it. That wasn't there before, and it's added only through the amendment, not on the main license. Okay, we're on the final stretch here. If I were to get to the point where I didn't want to renew, so I've decided that actually 2019 is going to be my last period with them, and I'm ducking out of the agreement, I could update a period note, and I can make this a closed agreement, and I can say it's closed because I've cancelled it. And I can save that. But if you remember, I said that we had a PCA agreement in place for this. So if I find some of the JAMA titles, and I'm just picking a few at random, to be honest there. So I'm going to create a new agreement directly from this list of titles. So this is my AMA PCA agreement. And this is active because it's, and let's say this starts on the 1st of January 2020. I don't have an end date for this because it goes on forever, and actually I can make this a perpetual agreement. So I can state that it's perpetual. And I can see the agreement lines are there. If I didn't actually have, maybe because my subscription was 2018 onwards, I can add custom coverage here to say that actually we only have issues from 2018 January, and I can put in a start volume and start issue there as well, and maybe that to 2019 12/31. So I can state in this post cancellation agreement I don't have the default coverage, which was what I got in my subscription. I only get the coverage I now get as PCA. And I'm not going to go through and do that for each line, but I obviously could do. What I am going to do is just at the bottom here is I can add related agreement. And so I can say that this agreement is related to my closed agreement. And the linked agreement, my original one, has post-cancellation access in this agreement that I'm creating. And I'm going to save and close that. And so now I have two. I have my open agreement and my closed agreement. That's my closed agreement. You can see it's grayed out here. And if I look at that though, I can see that I have a post-cancellation agreement, and it says it provides a post-cancellation agreement. So that relationship goes both ways. If I click on that, then I'm in the PCA agreement, and I can see my agreement lines and my coverage that is displaying slightly cramped there, but my coverage information, that's my custom coverage there that is rather obscured, but that icon there tells me that it's customized. It's not the default coverage from the package. And that is probably as much as anybody wants to take in on ERM in one sitting. I will very briefly go back to the slides to say, if I can, there you go. To say, in terms of future plans, we've got the Edelweiss release, what Harry called the Q4 release on the 20th of December, and we're gearing up to kind of make sure that everything works for that. Looking forward, we want to improve the way we handle non-serial resources within the internal knowledge base. We want to support KBART file import. We want to add support for trial agreements, as well as the agreements types you've already seen. We want to allow more customization in the local knowledge base, the internal knowledge base. That obviously is something that's already possible if you're using the EBSCO knowledge base via EHoldings. And we're going to bring in, hopefully, a set of tools that allow you to compare things like compare to the terms between two licenses, or compare the content of two packages, or compare what this agreement was like on one date versus another date, if you want to see how things have changed over time, or you want to report on, if we took package A, how will that compare to the subscriptions we already have? All of that kind of reporting we're looking forward to next year. this all seems amazingly exciting to you and you want more, please join us. We have an ERM subgroup meeting pretty much every Wednesday, and the details are on the wiki. And we also have a ERM team in the Slack instance, and you're welcome to get an account and join us there and contribute to discussion or ask questions if you have them. And I will say we've got a short amount of time for questions. Are there any questions?
There are a few. So one of the questions is, sometimes exact start dates are not specified. Does the form in agreements allow you to enter just a month and year and not include the day of the month?
No, you have to have a day. It has to be down to the day level.
And then we have a couple that are kind of similar. One is, can we use agreements licenses for non-e-resources, like a collection of print resources that require payment over time and maybe have restrictions or other management information that needs to be recorded somewhere, or a gift collection that comes with a legally binding deed of gift?
So it's not something that we've developed at them so far, but there's no, the way we have developed is to be very broad in what we think could work. There's nothing special that we've said it has to be an e-resource here, but it is designed with e-resources in mind first. But we've certainly had some discussion and people asking the same question. And I think it's something that we'd like to probably look at, but it's probably quite a long way down the track because we still think there's some fundamental e-resource stuff that we'd like to get working first. But if, for instance, somebody were to start a development that was about gift management, then we definitely would want to encourage them to integrate with our licenses or agreements and make use of that. And we'd be very happy to work with anybody who wants to develop in that direction.
Is there a place to designate open access resources? Would it be in a different place than license and agreements?
We don't have anything at the moment, although, so you could do, so one thing I didn't show was you can use, I should say, we don't have anything specific is the answer. There's no reason like it shouldn't be part of an agreement. You could add an open access package, and there certainly, I believe, open access packages in EKB, in the EBSCO knowledge base. I know there are in other knowledge bases. And if we, if you created an open access package, it could be manipulated in exactly the same way. You could decide not to link a license, or you can also have like what we call an external license, where you just point to an online set of conditions. So if there were like, depending on the open access nature, it could be pointing at an open access statement, or you could define something you called an open access license that you just used on open access collections if you want to manage it that way. So I think there are quite a lot of options there. You could also, one thing I didn't show is you can do tagging. That's another app that we integrate with that is a cross-folio app. So you can use that in lots of different places to add kind of folksonomy type metadata to anything, and including agreements. So you could tag an agreement as open access and use that as a filter, but we don't have a field at the moment where you can say, check, this is open access. Yeah.
So are there any other questions?
Well, thank you to everybody for listening carefully, and Harry for his introduction, and Eric for his excellent hosting. Really appreciated the time and opportunity to tell you about where we are with electronic resource management. Thanks very much.
So this concludes today's FOLIO Forum covering the ERM apps and the roadmap update. For a short recap and links to resources, look for the FOLIO_LSP Twitter feed. You can continue the conversation at the FOLIO discussion website, discuss.folio.org, and on Twitter using the hashtag FOLIO Forum. The recording of today's forum will be posted to YouTube shortly. Thank you to our speakers, Harry and Owen, and to everyone who asked questions and added comments.